Welcome, everybody. Today we're speaking with 26-year-old Ryan. He's a survivor from Taunton, Massachusetts. He has bravely come forward to share his story. This is part of our series, The Spoken Truth, Stories of the Unheard, where we create a space for those who were failed by the system to finally be heard, unfiltered and unedited. Ryan's experience spans over 3 years inside the Massachusetts foster care system, and what he lived through deserves not only attention, but action. So, Ryan, thank you for being here and for your courage in speaking out.
Thank you for giving me the platform to come and speak out. I really appreciate it.
Great. So let's get right into it. I want to ask you, can you briefly reintroduce yourself for those just learning about your story?
Yes, my name is Ryan Barratt. I am a survivor of the foster care system of over 3 years. I'm from Attleboro, but was placed in Taunton for a majority of it.
And what made you want to share the second part of your experience publicly?
I feel like a lot more people need to hear it because a lot of people don't understand how the foster care system is unless they actually live it. So I feel like someone who's went through it for a substantial amount of time coming forward and, explaining how it really is and, hopefully it gets out there to people who had similar experiences and stuff like that. And maybe it can encourage people to speak up.
Yeah. And you were with which foster family were you with?
I was with three different families, but what I want to talk about is the Gaspard, Robin and Brian Gaspard.
Okay. And what did a typical day look like inside the Gasper household?
Walking on eggshells, definitely, because you never knew if you were doing anything wrong. You couldn't do no wrong. It was emotional, definitely. The best times a day for a kid, which is unusual for a child, is like going to school. Any time I was either asleep or not in that home were the only great times I've had in that household. It was a normal day in the Gasper household was doing what they wanted you to do, not being a kid. It was traumatic, definitely. It was waking up not knowing, that was the hard part, was like not knowing how your day would go. Rarely you would have a good day, and most of the time it was a bad day. So typical day would be waking up wondering, if you're going to have a good day, bad day. And it was typically, like I said, like walking on eggshells, because any little thing you do in that household is like, your public enemy number one, basically.
Yeah. Can you describe the kinds of rules you were expected to follow there?
Yes, definitely. So, mind you, I try to respect people's rules the most I possibly can if I'm in someone else's household, but some of them were a little obnoxious to an extent. One of the rules were I had my own cell phone, so I could keep in contact with some family and friends back home because I was placed out of town. One of their main rules that I had an issue with was you had to put your phone up, I believe it was 7 o'clock. And that was one thing I tried to bring up with my social worker that I had an issue with was I would pay for my own phone. I would pay for my own phone service. I was working. The majority of the time I spent in that home, I was working. And basically, I always had an issue with that. Another rule was like, you can't talk about your case at all. That was one of the rules they had, which I felt like was really unnecessary too, because if I ever wanted to, like, talk to my lawyer about something or anything like that, like corresponding with court dates, I always had to make sure it was me walking to work or walking home from school or something so I could talk about it not in their house because they didn't want other kids hearing it or anything like that. And that was a big inconvenience for me because you know how DCF lawyers can be. It's a hit or miss whether you could get a hold of them. So I had to pray that I could get a hold of them walking home from school or walking from school to work. And that was a big difficulty of mine. And there were rules that were placed that weren't really put in place that like you basically like, they weren't said rules. They were never enforced or ever said, but basically like
Unwritten rules.
like yeah, not written rules. Yeah. So like basically one of them was like say if you have a bad experience with them, I knew like it was difficult to talk to like counselors, mentors that I had, or like the social worker because, no one really listened. And that's the one rule I got was like, if you blab, which I tried to a couple of times, there's repercussions for it. I've had my phone taken away a couple of times because I tried to explain to my worker and my counselors, like, there's mistreatment going on in the home. And whenever I did that, I would have my phone taken away for about a week because I was, quote, lying to counselors, social workers, this, that, and the other thing. So
So
it's
you're
like
saying
that.
that if you spoke out, they were punishing you to try to silence you almost?
Yes, definitely, because they didn't want their reputation damaged. They were always bragging about how they were one of the best foster homes and how they always get praise and this, that, and the other thing. And I'm a firm believer that's because no kids can really come forward and speak out because they get repercussions. And that's what was like really, really, really unfortunate was like, not a lot of kids could go and speak out. It was like one of those unwritten rules. It's like you knew to yourself, like, okay, if you speak out, your life's going to get 10 times harder if you do. And that was one of the biggest issues there. Another one of the rules, which is one of the topics I emailed you, was if you're working, if you get rides to and from school, to and from work, one of the rules was you had to pay $20 per
Yeah.
week. And that was another rule I obviously had a massive problem with
Now that
because,
you mentioned that, I actually had a question for you about that, so I'll ask you that now.
okay.
You had said that they charge you $20 for rides. Can you explain how that impacted your ability to go to school or go to work?
Absolutely. So, one thing I can finally admit now, because I can't get in any legal trouble for it, is I had to resort to my biological parents. So, I was only allowed to see my parents once a week, and it was through supervised visits, 2 hours a week. So, I made my parents aware on a phone call because they would also limit how much I could talk to my biological parents, which there was never a court order given at all that I was limited to a certain amount of phone time. There was no court order, no DCF order, nothing. And I would go to my parents and tell them, hey, listen, like, I don't know if you're familiar with like Rainham 44, where that McDonald's is. I had to walk from Harrison Street all the way to that McDonald's half the time because, like, I put my foot down because I didn't want to, like, pay $20 when they get $1,000 per kid, and per month those expenses should be covered already through the state. So I was like, no, I'm not giving into that. And there'd be times where my parents would, like, I would walk to a certain point away from the foster home where I wouldn't be seeing them. My biological parents would drive all the way from North Attleboro to Taunton to pick me up just to bring me to work or school. And there would be even times where if it's like, Massachusetts is different from where I live now. I remember walking to school and it'd be like negative-degree days, like a lot of snow. My parents would wake up at 4 o'clock every morning, drive to Taunton from North Attleboro every morning to pick me up and, like, bring me to school. And just so I wouldn't have to pay out of pocket. Now, mind you, they have to go more out of their way than my foster parents had to. I couldn't tell anybody about what I was doing because, you know, that would have made the case a lot worse. Those were like, those weren't approved. Like, I wasn't supposed to do it, but like I felt like I had no choice. It was difficult for me to walk in the snow, and I didn't want to have to pay out of pocket just to get rides to school, something I'm required by DCF to do.
Yeah.
And
How
work
did it?
was another thing that was required too, because my foster parents, that was another rule. School wasn't enough for them. So you either had to do an after school activity or work. So me getting a job was something that was required by my foster parents, not DCF, and they still wanted to charge me money to bring me. And that was another rule that didn't make any sense either, because, like, if you want me to do like work or after school activities, but you want to pay, like, charge me to go to and from, like,
How did it feel
one,
knowing that they were getting paid to care for you while still taking your money and mistreating you?
it hurt. And honestly, it was an eye opener because it really showed me one thing I always believed in. And I've had a lot of people tell me this, and, like, I had to see it firsthand for myself. Is I think DCF in general and that home alone was just all about the money. It's what they could get, which was crazy because what made, like, in that aspect, what hurt me the most too was knowing that the foster dad, Brian Gasper, he had his own business, like carpentry and repairs, and they were homeowners and they were landlords. So they had decent amount of money. Plus, like, the money they get from DCF and stuff like that, they have a decent amount of money they're reeling in. And the fact that they felt the need to take that from, the foster kids when they already get paid $1,000 a month per child that's supposed to cover those expenses. At the time, what was going through my head was like, yeah, this can't be legal. Like, there's no way like they can do this and stuff like that. Like, and trying to explain it to my DCF worker and stuff like that ended up in repercussions too, because that's the one thing I mentioned to him. Because I had to find out through my lawyer that my DCF parents get paid that much. She looked into it for me because she was the first person I went to. And she like even advised me. She said, I know you're gonna get repercussions from your foster parents for doing this, but you're gonna have to reach out to your worker and tell them this because they're getting paid monthly to like bring you to work or school. And she's like, school's required by DCF, so you shouldn't be getting charged for that. And
I don't think they should
you
have been charging you at all for even rights work.
no, exactly, because it was like an adolescent foster home until they started taking like 8-year-olds and stuff, and before I left they started taking younger kids in. And their reasoning for charging me was like, when you go out into the real world, this is what you're going to experience. And it's like, yeah, like, okay, I get that, but also too, bringing me to school, what parent charges their own kid to get rides to school? Like, that's insane. And work, it's like
Just out of curiosity,
Harrison.
what year was this in?
This was in I got placed with them September 2014. I started working, I want to say around January, February of 2015. And ever since then, like that, when I started working, that's when they started like charging me money to go, like, to and from work and like to and from school.
I'm
And
from Taunton, and I had quite a distance between where I was living and school. And I could tell you that, well, I had graduated. My graduation year was 1999, but at that time in 2014, 2015, you could have got a taxi for half that cost.
yeah, exactly. And the fact that Harrison Street and the Rainham 44 McDonald's was only like not even a 10-minute ride there and back, it wasn't much compensation. And my biological parents were quite upset about it too, because the way my mom looked at it was like they took you away from us because they felt like our household wasn't deemed safe for children, but you have to walk to work in the snow along Rainham 44, which is really dangerous to do. It's like, yeah, like, that's insane. And that's when my mom's like, listen, we could go behind DCF's back. I could pick you up, bring you to work and stuff like that. That way you're safer, you're not freezing or anything like that. And like, you'll be good to go. And yeah, what we were doing was really risky because if we got caught, we're going against a court order. That was a big deal. But like, I had no choice. Like, they backed me up against the wall there because, walking down 44 is not the funnest thing to do, especially when you have a bunch of snowbanks and you can't see what's the road and what's the sidewalk, and the fact that they still had no problem with me walking to and from work, like,
Yeah, I'm
in
very
those conditions
familiar.
was sad.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with 44. I used to ride my bike up and down there a lot. Used to go all the way up to Middleborough Rotary. But you mentioned verbal abuse, and I
Yeah.
wanted to ask if you could share a moment that still sticks with you, something that kind of defined how they treated you.
One of the things that always stuck with me was it goes into like how I said to talk about the biological parents. That was a massive problem I had in their household that got to me like very verbally. Was there was a point in my case where they were considering terminating parental rights. All I heard from them was like, oh, they deserve it. They deserve it. This, that, the other thing. And it's like, I've only been in the system for 6 months and they're already considering doing that. It's like they've been doing what they want to do. And that got to me like mentally a lot because it's like anytime I would stick up for my parents, which would be like all of the time, that's when, like I would get in the most trouble because I would say some stuff back and everything because I know a lot of their backstory too. They used to have drug problems when they were parents growing up. And I would always shoot back with like, okay, like you say stuff about my parents, but you guys weren't always the great parents back then either. I heard a lot about y'all. It's like, I would always try to stick up for my folks because I should have never been placed in the system to begin with. I was a firm believer on that, and I still am. If they
Yeah,
were to remove children, parents who fight all the time, it's like that happens sometimes, it's like, and that's all it really was. And when they would constantly, like, they would they would talk about my parents a lot, that would get to me the most. Definitely, like, oh, they would always take jibes at me because I would walk to work, walk to go have fun walking in the snow down 44. She's like, $20, you get a ride. And it's like, I'm not doing that.
yeah. So
And,
you don't want to get a ride from your real parents, and it
yeah,
makes it tough. You mentioned
yeah.
drug use in the home. I'm curious. So, what kind of activity did you witness, and did DCF ever check or investigate?
Yeah, so the drug use that was used in the home was marijuana. It was a lot of marijuana because there were times in that home where I was like really, 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 really low. And in school, I was experimenting with marijuana, this, that, and the other thing. I got caught with it. And they called my social worker, this, that, the other thing, like, oh, Ryan did this. And next thing you know, I can smell a strong odor of marijuana. And like, I don't know how familiar you are with it, but like, you could tell a difference if it's lit than like, if it's actually just out and exposed. And my foster dad had like a caveman room that was like linked to the living room. And all you can smell coming out of that room was like weed. And like, you could tell like he was smoking it. And like, I still like use it to this day, and I know the distinctive difference if it's just sitting out versus like someone actually like hitting on it. And I'm like, that's crazy. So like, he gets me with drug use and stuff like that, and he's using it himself with their old foster daughter Catalina. And I tried reporting that to my worker, and all I got from my worker basically was like, "Oh, you're just saying that because you got in trouble with it. You got caught with it." And I'm like, "No, like, yeah, I owned up to it. I knew I wasn't supposed to do it. I did it anyways. I'll own up to it. Like, I was mature about it. I didn't have a problem with that. I'll take my consequence. I knew it was going to happen at some point, but." They're not supposed to be using it though. You take kids away from their parents because they smoke marijuana, this, that, and the other thing, and your own foster parents are using it, and you're paying them to do so. And it
You
wasn't
are,
the only time I smelled weed in the household either. That's why I started experimenting with it too, because I used to smell that odor come from his room way before I even started smoking. So I figured, okay, if I get caught with this, it might not be as bad, but I was completely wrong. But I knew I was like doing it back then, and it was like not that great of like, it's not a good example. But they were foster parents. They had more of an example to set than I did because I was only like 15 at the time.
yeah, you weren't supposed to be the
So
role model. You were supposed to be learning from role models.
exactly.
You said that they planted drugs in your backpack. What happened that day, and what were the consequences?
So I came home from school one day, and this was in the midst of them catching me smoking, and they wanted to get me in trouble again. Because at that point, like, yeah, I still proceeded to smoke. I was just way more cautious about it. And basically, I came home from school one day. I set my backpack on my bed, and I'm like, okay, like, I'm going to go use the bathroom. I'm going to go back, sit in my room, and do my homework. Next thing you know, my backpack's not on my bed when I come in. I'm like, okay, either someone took it or it grew legs. So I go to my foster dad and I say, hey, where's my backpack? And then he's ruffling through my bag and he pulls out a bag of weed. Now, mind you, this bag of weed, if I was gonna buy it myself back then, would have probably have costed me, I want to say like $250, maybe. It was like an ounce. It was at least an ounce. And there was no way I was carrying that much on me. I was a kid buying dimes and dubs, like it wasn't that much. So I knew it was planted in my bag. I said, that's not mine. I said, that's not mine at all. And he kept insisting, oh, it's yours, it's yours, it's yours. I was like, okay, you could keep saying it's mine, but it's not. I said, it's probably yours. And that's when he flipped out. His wife came home. They started arguing me, yelling at me for it. And then they called my social worker. And my social worker told me, if you keep doing this, this is going to prolong your reunification with your parents. And I said, so you're going to hold me in your care longer for something I didn't really do. He's like, oh, I'm not going to. I'm just telling you now. It's a warning. You get caught with it again, I can technically make it to where you are in our care until you're 18. Because my birthday's in September. My reunification date was that June before I was turning 18. So basically, as I kept getting as they kept trying to, get me in trouble, it was lingering over my head. Like, I'll have another 3 months to suffer through this if I have to. And I wasn't trying to. But like I kept telling my lawyer, listen, like, they're planting weed in my backpack. There's got to be something we can do about that. And she's like, you have to catch them in the act doing it, basically. which I figured. So it's like I could never do that. It's like, I tried so hard. I even had like, my phone set up in my bag with the camera going, nothing. And after I raised suspicion of it being planted in my backpack, they never did it again. But that resulted, when you asked about the repercussions, I got my phone taken away, I want to say, for a month. The only way I was able to ever communicate with my parents if I was using my girlfriend's phone at the time in school or visits.
Yeah. Yeah. Now you said that they had a nephew, right? Is David Navarro?
David Navarro, yes, sir.
What role did he play in the home?
He was basically the enforcer. He was the enforcer, basically. It's sad to say, but yeah, he was the enforcer. So if anybody lashed out on his aunt and uncle, he was right there. If you had anything to say back to the aunt and uncle, he was right there. If you had a really bad outburst with the aunt and uncle, he was right there. And he was always there too, as like the bully, basically, to keep kids in check, basically.
Yeah.
And he was the bully slash the enforcer.
Now, if one of you kids tried to defend yourself against them, how did the Gasper the foster parents respond when that happened?
Not so great. So none of the other, I was the only kid that tried to defend himself against David, because David is pretty tall. He's like almost 6 feet. He he's not he because a lot of the kids there, he was like intimidating. But one of the grateful things I could say about my biological parents is they put me through like boxing and karate lessons when I was younger, because I always got bullied on. So they wanted to make sure I was ready just in case, and I'm glad they did, because that came in great use against David. Because there was one specific day where it was one of the times where they were talking bad about my biological parents, and David was there and he was chiming in. And at the time, I almost like snapped. We were all sitting at the table. I stood up, and David was basically stood up along with me and got in my face. And he kept talking about my parents, and I warned him. I said, "Listen," I said, "you may bully these other foster kids and everything like that, but you're not going to bully me. I'm telling you that right now. It's not going to happen. It's like I may take it from your aunt and uncle, but I'm not taking it from you." And then he said another comment about my mother, something about like, "Oh, your mother rather smoke crack or something than get you back," which is funny because my mom's never touched drugs a day in her life. And then he slapped me across the face. The foster parents did nothing.
Now, were you ever able
And
to talk to your social worker about this?
I did. And
What happened?
that nothing. They talked to the foster parents, and that's basically it. Nothing would come of it. And if they ever open an investigation, it would always be found as unfounded. My younger sibling Nicholas had that same problem in his foster home. That's another story for another day, but he also had abuse issues too, and it was always unfounded. And that's the tough thing about foster kids that a lot of people don't understand, is if you report some of this shit, it always comes back unfounded, because like no one wants to believe you, because they take the word of the foster parents as that's like, that's like their bread and butter. Like, that those are their foster parents. They gotta like stick by them thick and thin.
Yeah, it's going to be your
And
word against everyone else's.
yeah, and that's what made it really difficult. But when I defended myself against David Navarro, they had no problem finding it that like I was the abuser in that moment, because I had to fight back. It's like I had to show, if I was going to be in this home for a little while longer, it's like I can't let this, person think he's going to like lay hands on me, and it's not going to happen back towards him. And when I got the better of him, that's when the foster dad had to restrain me and get me off of him. And that's when my foster parents had my social worker come over and talk about the whole scenario. They made it like I was acting out and enraged, and they had to try to restrain me, which is the exact opposite of what happened. They were talking about everybody's biological parents, and when they got to mine and found out I was going to sit there and defend them, they didn't like it.
Yeah. So it's safe to say that there were a lot of moments where you felt completely hopeless, like no one was listening or helping,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Absolutely. I've
Well,
tried the DCF in Boston. I've tried DCF in Taunton. My lawyer She was a quote on my side because that's what she was getting paid to do, but she was not the greatest. I could tell you that. Like when it came to legal advice or anything, it was like useless basically. I was on my own basically. The only people I could turn to were my parents to talk to because they would be the ones to believe me, sit there and listen and everything. And that's what hurt me and my mother and father the most was the fact that they couldn't do anything either. Because if they did something, it would result in me getting repercussions. Because if you report the foster family, you're made out to be the bad guy, basically, at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, and you said your parents were doing what DCF had asked. So do you think you should have been returned home sooner?
Absolutely. We were removed in June. They told my mother at the time, my dad was at the time incarcerated, so it was my mother. They had no problem with that being incarcerated either because it was due to something completely different. It was nothing like endangering. It was my mom had to do basically parent counseling and all that stuff. Same with my dad, anger management counseling, this, that, the other thing. I was expecting within 6 months. That 6 months turned into a year. I think they stalled it out as long as they possibly could.
Yeah.
I almost turned 18 before I got back. I reunified with my mother in June of 2016, and I was 17 at the time, and I was 13 when I was removed.
Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy. Do you think that DCF knew what was going on? You think they were willfully ignoring it?
Yeah, I think they were willfully ignoring it. They have to protect their own.
Yeah.
So they did that by any means necessary.
Well, what would you say to the DCF caseworkers who look the other way?
I would tell them, listen, like, you guys are ignoring this problem. And they kept making it like I was the problem because how I went from one foster home to a different foster home. If you have a reputation as a foster kid to bounce around, excuse me, forget it basically. It's like, if you got bounced around a lot, they wouldn't take you at your word or anything.
Yeah.
Even when I went to school counselors and stuff like that with the issues with Robin and Brian Gasper, they would have to call DCF because that was their job. I couldn't blame them as far as that goes because they're just school officials. They don't really know what to do. They have to call them. And, like one thing led to another, and it would always end up with like, me not getting believed, being labeled the liar, and I would get repercussions for it basically because their way of giving me repercussions for speaking out against them was, oh, you're telling lies, boom, you're in trouble. Like, give me your phone, this, that, the other thing. And when I would try to explain to these DCF workers that would look the other way, it would just be the same thing. You're lying. You're lying. You're not being truthful. You're not being truthful. This, that, and the other thing. And that really sucked because, like, at that point, it's like I had no one to turn to. Like, I legit had no choice but to, like, tough it out.
Yeah. Well, and here we are now, almost a decade later. So, I have to ask, looking back now, what kind of emotional toll did those years take on you?
It took a lot on me. It took a lot of readjusting. I still to this day, like, I always look back and think about it. And it takes a toll on me knowing too, because a lot of other kids are going through this. And from what I've been reading from a lot of people and stuff like that, like Google reviews, this, that, the other thing, DCF hasn't gotten any better. And that is really unfortunate to see. And what takes the toll on me the most is like all the stuff I had to go through and all of it. And it's like I've never asked to go through any of it. My parents never asked to go through any of it. And it's just 3 years I can never get back. And that's the toughest part for me is rebuilding like what I lost for 3 years. And still to this day, I actually still have problems every now and then with the Gaspers that don't go away, believe it or not.
You brought up a good point there, by the way, about the Google review, because that's actually how you found me, right? It was through a Google
Yeah.
review I left for the Taunton DCF office. And I think that it's important for people who have experiences similar to ours or other negative experiences within the system that you go and you post a review so other people will see it. Because a lot of times we're not heard, but we see other things that people write. And that's how we can connect. So that was a great thing that you brought up that point because it was crazy how you found me that way. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I was just surprised to see, because, a lot of people are nervous and afraid to speak out. And when I saw you given the platform to come out and speak out about, like, a lot of the negligence going on in the system in DCF and how corrupt it is, it's like, this is perfect. It's like, this is something I've been wanting to do for a while, but it's really hard to do alone. And when I was talking to your niece yesterday, that was another one of the things that she brought up with me was like, this is a really hard thing to do alone, because it's like, one versus all type thing. And it's like difficult. And that's what I told her. I told you numerous times, it's like, I'm here for it. And I hope a lot of other people can come forward with it too, because, it's an ongoing problem that's been going on. Reading your story, even back from, 98 and on, like, that's rough. And the fact that, like, even though I wasn't like up and abandoned, I still felt that way, even though I was in their home. Cause, like I said, like, if I went to anybody like DCF about anything, I really couldn't.
Yeah, you
So it's
probably
like,
felt like me. You felt like an outcast.
yeah, like an outcast. Like, either way, it's like I'm alone, because it's like like my parents were there, yeah, but like, there was not much they could do either. They were also the bad guys in the situation to DCF, so they never really listened to them.
Yeah. Well, you certainly do have a voice. So let me ask you, what would you say to Robin and Brian Gasper if they're watching this?
If I were to say anything to Robin and Brian Gasper, I would leave it at this. If you guys had any conscience left in you or any soul left in you, you would resign as foster parents. You guys are not qualified. You guys are not cut out to be foster parents. You guys are some of the most horrible people I've met on that journey. Better yet, the most horrible people I've met in my entire life. And the fact that you guys would treat other human beings the way you've treated me and a couple of other children is really sad and disgusting. I would really hope that you guys consider resigning from DCF and as foster parents, and leave it to people that actually care about kids, maybe, and that actually want to do their job as a foster parent, because you guys are not qualified for it at all. You guys never wanted me to have a voice. You guys never wanted me to speak out or anything like that. I had to sit back and watch for 3 years and say absolutely nothing, almost, because I would be so afraid of the outcome or the repercussions you guys would give me. Now you guys are in my position almost a decade later, and all you guys have to do now is sit back and enjoy this ride I am going to take you on. Because whether you guys resign or I have to keep exposing you guys until I breathe my last breath, I will make it a personal mission to make sure that you guys are no longer foster parents. You guys don't deserve to have that foster parent title. And I am going to do everything in my power to have that revoked from you, whether you guys willingly go and do it, which I doubt you guys will. So I am going to keep sharing my story as much as I possibly can. And I'm going to do everything, every fiber of my being, to make sure that you guys lose your foster license. I promise you guys that. You put me through enough, and you put a lot of other kids through enough. And I'm going to make sure it gets put to an end. And I'm very grateful I got to come on here and expose you guys to the world for what kind of people you guys truly are: cowards and disgusting human beings.
Yeah. Well, it must have felt good to be able to get that off of your chest, to have some platform. Usually, when you try to say things
Absolutely.
like that online, they want to censor you, and it's real tough.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
let's move forward here, and let's talk a little bit about healing and moving forward. I'm curious as to what helped you survive everything that was going on, and was there anything or anyone who gave you a sense of hope during those years?
I would have to say my younger siblings, definitely. I don't talk to them right now. I don't have the greatest relationship with them. But the one thing I can say is my sister Ashley, who was 2 years younger than me, and my brother Nick, who was 5 years younger than me at the time, who were also in the foster system. I felt like I had to stay strong for them, because I had to set the example, like, be tough and just, you know, like, we have to survive. And I had to set that example for them. That was the most important thing for me, because my brother and my sister went through hell, not just me, them as well. My sister got sent to a crisis unit because she was cutting herself because she tried to take her own life while she was in the foster system because she was neglected as well, and no one ever listened to her. And at that moment it made me realize like I really have to like toughen up. I really have to be the backbone that they need, and that they helped me a lot.
Yeah.
They were also my backbone as well. I may not talk to them right now or have the greatest relationship with them. That's the one thing I can admit is like I had to do it also for my parents too, because I knew there was gonna come a time where I was gonna be back with my parents, whether if it was reunification or once the clock strike midnight and I'm 18, I'm out. But like I knew there was a light at the end of the tunnel as well. Like, and that's what I also want to say to some like kids that might be in foster care right now who feel like they may not have a voice, like if they were ever put in my situation. Best advice I could give to them if they are ever in the situation I was in is like you may not feel like you have a voice now, but there's a light at the end of this tunnel. Once you turn 18, you have that voice freely. They can't do anything to you. And that would be my best advice. If you don't have that voice right now to where you can speak out, you will eventually get that opportunity. And that was one of the things that made me tough it out as well too. I knew at some point in my life down the road that I would be able to sit down, have this moment I'm having right now,
Yeah.
and that's what I really wanted to do because I knew someday I was going to be able to come on some kind of platform, whether if it was a news station, podcast, or whichever it may be. I knew I was going to be able to expose DCF and all of these placements I was getting for the frauds that they are. And that's the one thing that motivated me the most was knowing I would have that platform to come on and speak about what experiences I had. And like that's what meant the most to me right now, definitely, is like being able to come forward and speak to someone and talk to someone about like what I went through. And that was one of my points I kept making to myself in my head over and over those 3 years I was in that household was like there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I just have to survive until I make it to that light. And that was it. I believe it was June 23rd of 2016. And once I was released from DCF care, so I got placed back with my parents after Robin and Brian Gasper, but I was still technically in DCF custody. My parents were just my placement. And once I turned 18, I was out of their care. I waited a little bit until my brother and sister, got out of care, and that's when I was able to speak out. And moving forward, those 3 years was like tough, like I said, but what helped me the most, like I said, was my siblings and the light at the end of the tunnel. And every single foster kid has that light at the end of the tunnel. They just have to make it there.
Yeah. All right. Well, why is it important for survivors like you to speak out now?
Because if no one speaks out, nothing's gonna get done. Nothing's gonna get done, and I think we're prime examples of that. Because your story started, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. It was '98, right?
Actually, my story started in 1982. They took me when I was a year and a half old and then replaced me back with my abusive mother and then had incidents in the 90s. So it actually, the incident that happened in the 90s when they abandoned me is actually a continuation of abusive pattern I went through my entire life at the hands of my mother. So, yeah.
Yeah, and the abandonment at school and like how long ago that was, and then when you fast forward to like 2013 with like my case, and like you would think like all those years from your case to mine there would be some improvement in the system, and I don't see a lot of people speak out, and that's why I do think it's really really important because it can prevent a lot of heartache and it can prevent a lot of problems in the future, and maybe it can shape in DCF up. And if they are watching this at some point, that would be my message to them as well. Is like, there are other survivors like me that will come forward at some point and will speak out about these experiences. I hope you guys are willing to listen to all of them because it's important. And I think it's important for people to speak out because DCF has a reputation habit of covering up their reputation and covering up all the bad things they do to kids. I want to be the I want to I came on here to try to set that example, for other people to come out and uncover what they've been covering up all these years. Obviously, it's been decades.
Yeah. So, yeah, I was actually going to ask that. I said, if you have one message to the public about DCF and the foster care system, what would it be? Be to the public, not to other survivors
Yeah.
or victims, but to the public. What would you say?
To the public, I would say, if I was going to say a message to the public, it would be that it sounds harsh, but you guys don't know what a lot of these people go through in the foster system, or not just the foster kids like myself, but the parents. It's hard and it's difficult, and they're not the people that they crack themselves up to be. I hope the public can take the time to listen to this and realize that DCF at 90%, 95% of the time, they're not there to do good, they're there to do bad. And I hope the public can understand that, DCF may put that mask on that they're good people. They have the best interests of the child, the family, and everything like that. They don't.
Yes.
And I want the public to know there are a lot of other people like me. There are a lot of other people, like a lot of parents out there. I feel for them, and I hope the public can understand. Like, they may think they know a lot about like DCF, and some of them may think they're good people. They're really not. They're out to break and destroy families, and I hope the public can see that one day, and this can get enough publicity and attention to the point to where we can probably actually initiate decent change to DCF.
Yeah, that's a great message. And I want to let everyone who's watching know that Ryan has a part 1 to his story on the fuckdcf.com website. You could go check that out. This was a part 2. And I want to ask you if there's anything that you didn't get to say in part 1 or now that's still on your heart before we end the interview.
If I got into explaining a lot of like my DCF experience besides the Gasper's, obviously there's a lot on my heart. Definitely more stories to be told in the future, but definitely anything from the Gasper's, I would want to say no. Like I said, what's on my heart is it sucks, and I am disgusted at the acts taken from these foster parents. And in my heart, truly, I hope they do resign as foster parents, and if not, I know in my heart, one thing like I said, I got to do and I'm committed to is getting my story out there, sharing it, and making sure that they lose their foster license. That's the one thing that's currently in my heart right now. And I'm thankful I made it through it too. That's another thing that always holds greatly in my heart is like my parents helped me, my siblings helped me and stuff like that. And, you know, I basically covered just about everything, like a lot of the heartache and stuff like that I went through in that foster home and stuff like that. And, you know, there's obviously a lot more to my 3-year journey that like I haven't opened up about yet. I am going to though, definitely. And, I just want DCF to get the message that people aren't going to sit back anymore. They're not going to be silent anymore. People are going to start coming forward and speaking out, and I hope they're ready for it because a lot of the stuff that goes on behind closed doors with this corporation is really, really sickening. And I really hope that, the public and everybody can understand where I'm coming from. And I hope it gets out there to a lot of people. That currently is what's in my heart right now, is making sure this message gets out there that, so it stops happening to other kids and parents.
Yeah, and I want to thank you for coming on and doing the interview. It takes a lot of courage to, speak out publicly against, things like this. A lot of people struggle to do it, and you never know, your voice could be the one that encourages another person to come forward. And if you are a person who's been affected negatively by child services and the foster care system, I encourage you to come forward and tell your story. You don't have to show your face like Ryan. You can tell your story anonymously. We'll listen and we'll tell your story. You just have to reach out to us so we know you exist. We're willing to listen. Ryan, thank you so much. I appreciate you joining us. This has been the Spoken
Thank you.
Truth, Stories of the Unheard.